Greetings everyone. Welcome to the lecture on gender and performance. Theatre in India has had a long tradition, and the association of women with the dramatic arts has been as old as the institution of theatre itself. However, there is lack of proper source and study materials on female participation and presence in Indian theatre as an area of reading and research. Although women have performed roles that have ranged from playwrights to direction and acting to criticism, research and organization, there is definitely a gap that needs to be fulfilled. Let us look at the historical genesis of performance as far as gender identity is concerned. A brief survey of the Sanskrit stage and dramas with a focus on the function of women unearths the fact that the door of the theatre was not closed to them. She had her own space that was specifically defined for her, an all-women theatrical space which was known as Istri Preksha. The term Istri Preksha was first adopted by Kautilya, the author of Arthashastra, around 4th century BCE, indicating plays that were performed exclusively by female artists. And in the Ganika Dhyaksha Prakarana, Kautilya wrote in detail about Ganikas, Natas, Nartakas, Gayak, Vadak and others, their salary as well as the price of their freedom. Then we also get a reference to women presence in this field from Kalidasa's writings. So Kalidasa referred to this tradition of Istri Preksha in his play Vikramorvashiya. In the play, a mythical account was dramatized by an all-female cast in the court of god Indra, the play within the play. Lakshmi Swayamvara was composed by Saraswati, the goddess of learning. Apsaras like Urvashi, Varuni, Menaka compiled and also they kind of followed the direction of Bharata. And in this mythical account, we also find the reflection of the contemporary tradition for an all-female dramatic performance with which Kalidasa was definitely acquainted. So while Kalidasa was writing during the Gupta period around 4th and 5th centuries, hence the continuation of Istri Preksha around this period can be assumed. Then in the Hari Vamsha Purana that was compiled around 3rd or 4th centuries CE, again there was an elaborate description of female actresses staging a number of episodes from Krishna's life on the seashore. An episode in Vishnu Puran further captured instances of female actresses entertaining the Yadava clan led by Krishna and his elder brother Balaram with their dance, song and acting performances. Then regional tastes also found their expression in their dress as well as dialects. So therefore, Kutini Mattam Kavyam by Damodar Gupta, this which can be traced to around 8th century, the Kashmiri poet depicted the presentation of the first act of Sri Harsha's play Ratnavali by the Ganikas of Varanasi. Now this enactment again was an all-female affair where prominent male roles like those of Vatsaraj, Udayan, Vidushak, etc. were also enacted by women. Then of course one can mention Bhasa's plays. Bhasa's drama portrayed women's ideal roles as wives. This constraining atmosphere rigidified itself gradually, and by the age of Bhavabhuti, around 8th century, the decadence in their position was rated the maximum. And finally, their disappearance became a reality, and soon a time came when females were no longer allowed to enact roles. And this change happened somewhere around early medieval period onwards and continued thereafter. So, one major change that came about during the medieval period was replacing women with boys, and by introducing young boys below 14 years to impersonate women characters in the plays. So, women almost disappeared from the theatrical scene with series of foreign invasions along with the other disturbances that started. The Sanskrit Sutradhar was accompanied by a female character called Nati. In a dialogic tone, the Sutradhar introduced the play to the audience, and the Nati, through her songs and dance, amused the audience. Then there emerged a hereditary class of theatre artists by 10th century known as the Charanas, and they continued this tradition under the patronage of kings, for example the Vijayanagar Empire. So the female roles in theatre were now played by Nattis, who were also nomenclatured as Devadasis. Now, coming to this description of the Devdasi, that is in the service of God, the practice of dedicating girls to a life in temples by symbolically marrying them to the deity of the temple surfaced during medieval India. They were called the Devdasis. As their name suggests, they were the dasis to the god, that is, they were expected to serve God through their performance, dance, music, and completely submitted themselves to God by controlling their natural human senses, impulses, and feelings, as now they were only to be devoted to their deity. So, Devadasis generally danced twice daily, once in the morning where audiences were allowed, and secondly in total seclusion to the Lord at night. The popularity of Devadasis seemed to have reached its height around 10th and 11th centuries. The name of Devdasi, Sutanuka, is inscribed in the Jogi Mara cave just near to the most ancient Indian cave theatre of Sita Binga in the Ramgarh Hills. This clearly links Devadasis with the theatre institution, a process that had started from 8th-9th centuries onwards. So Devdasis, Ganikas, Nattis, they all served the Indian theatre tradition for a long duration till the Turkish invasion. But the stigma of prostitution clung to their work and their performances. Now, coming to the colonial period and what was the kind of attitude towards them that was visible during the colonial period, here one must mention the issue of Victorian morality. They came under attack in 1830s by Victorian morality and social reformist programs that saw it as a system that actively encouraged prostitution. So Devadasis and unmarried women who were sometimes romantically involved with their male patrons were considered as posing a threat to the ideal of the respectable married family woman and to the notion of a community that firmly believed in the principle of marriage. Even the attitude of nationalism was quite disrespectful towards them, and during the nationalist movement that emerged in the late 19th century, the discourse about women occupied a central role. The status of women was seen as an indicator of India's modernity and its ability to emerge as a strong, respectable nation. At the same time, women were seen as the rightful keepers of tradition, as has been marked by Partha Chatterjee. That how elite Indian nationalism was highly gendered. The re-articulation of Indian womanhood was the foundation, it was the key foundation upon which the notion of an inner sphere, the representative of all Indians, was kind of built. And so, this dichotomy between the outside world and the inside world, that is, the home and the public realm, became all the more clear. And soon there emerged idealized notions of femininity. And these idealized notions became central to the idea of inner sphere, and it clearly came to be inscribed on the images of women by regulating how they should look, how they should dress, how they should speak, sing or project themselves, and with whom they should interact. So, the opposition between the inner and the outer sphere of the nation further enabled a series of parallel and related oppositions that became all the more visible during this period. So, therefore, there was private versus public, home versus world, women versus men, middle class women versus lower class women, and family women versus prostitutes or public women. So, what we see that there was definitely a social stigma that was being attached to the image of a public woman. Nowhere did this dichotomy become clearer than in the social reformist discourse on the Devadasis. So, the artistic accomplishments of Devadasis and their authority as musicians and dancers were completely overshadowed in the 19th and early 20th century because of this social stigma that came to be attached to their profession. The Devadasi system was legally abolished in 1947, and this also kind of removed them from the public sphere as performers. Now, next important discussion that one can have when one is talking about women and theatre is the role played by Parsi theatre and the gender implications that emerged. So, the later half of the 19th century and the early 20th century was also a period of transition when the public image of Indian women was being crafted not only through literature and social experiments, but also through the commercial media of the Parsi theatre, which was highly influential between 1850s and 1930s, because then after that the stage was taken over by cinema. And as a result of this, different processes emerged and the sexes came to be firmly segregated. So, women from good families dared not come out into the mardan khanas or the living rooms for men of their own houses, where their husbands used to indulge in hookahs, pan, watching Nautch girls dance and sing with their male friends. So, all communities, including the otherwise highly progressive Parsis, believed that the presence of real flesh and blood women on stage would corrode moral values and would also lead to extreme forms of immorality. So, therefore, they also kind of championed the process of using female impersonators. Not only female impersonators, but also editors, thespians, directors, theatre owners, they all came together in blocking real women from joining commercial theatre companies and enacting female roles on stage. The sight of a woman in public was enveloped in moral condemnation, and the actress' low status was re-inscribed in the theatrical discourse. So, for the viewer, thus incapacitated in his or her ability to read the actress as other than prostitute, the female impersonator of the Parsi theatre offered a more acceptable alternative. So, therefore, now the audience was willing to watch a play if there was the role of a female was being performed by a male impersonator, because otherwise the issues of morality were raised. So, the discourse of respectability encouraged the already existing fascination for erotic display, and both were manipulated by the profit-seeking proprietors in a struggle for control of the represented female body. Now, this kind of a projection had definitely gendered implications. So, Parsi theatre was the most intriguing for its use of gender and race cross-dressing. Hansen has done a detailed research on this and has mentioned that for most of the history of the theatre in South Asia, women have been represented by men. When women do come on stage in the late 19th century and appear on cinema in the 20th century, their identity was constructed as racially other. So, there were actresses of Anglo-Indian, Jewish or mixed parentage, and even some courtesans kind of predominated as actresses. The female impersonator played a critical role in the construction of new norms of Indian femininity. So, she was complemented by Anglo-Indian and Jewish actresses who kind of impersonated as heroines of the plays. The practice of Indian males passing as females and foreign women passing as Indian women was something that happened increasingly on the Parsi stage. Female impersonators structured the space into which female performers were to insert themselves, affecting the transition from stigmatized older practices to the newly consolidated representation of Indian women. And this new kind of representation was that of Bharatiya Nari, an ideal that was also being championed by the nationalists. So, as has been pointed out by Pandey, these female impersonators assumed feminine airs. She writes of Master Champalal, who was a player of female roles in several travelling Parsi theatre companies for several years, and he recounted in great detail the kind of intense practice that was required of youngsters to become the perfect woman on the stage, because it was all about gait and graces, bodily movements, and also voice modulation, because they all had to project a female on the stage belonging to good families. And in fact, in Maharashtra, women copied Bal Gandharva's style of draping the 9-yard sari and the way he used to walk on the stage. So, we see that women's visibility in the performance space was definitely compromised, and there was a lengthy process of negotiation wherein the performer's status and image were reworked to incorporate the signs of Indian womanhood. Parsi theatre, which polished the art of female impersonation by male actors, could also be seen as the precursor of Hindi films. However, exclusion of women from the theatre is also recorded in several other forms of folk traditions. So it was not as if only the Parsi theatre or the kind of depictions that it was indulging in was relegating women to the background. Even several kind of folk traditions, for example Ras Leela, Ram Leela or Jatra or Ayyappam and several more folk forms belonging to contemporary times started doing away with the presence of women, and what emerged was the boys as impersonators. So the boy actors were recruited around the age of 8 to 10 years when they had feminine qualities. So the Bhavai of Gujarat or the Jatra of Bengal also consisted of male actors who specialized in both male as well as female roles. The Nautanki poets also took delight to describe women as murderers, lustful, vamps, warring goddesses, or indulging in all kind of evil practices, and the audience would kind of really appreciate that kind of a depiction on stage. Now, let us also talk about as to the appropriation of theatre of the marginalized, a fact that has been discussed and researched by Rege. Rege has explained as to how Lavani and Povada performances in Maharashtra, which largely belonged to the marginalized, were also gradually appropriated by the royalty to suit their own tastes and idea. So while tracing the history of Lavani, which was a lower caste performance, Rege has explained how Lavani, as an expression of the everyday desire of common people, became reduced to a performance satiating only male desire in the upper caste court performances. As a result, one can talk about two types of cultural colonization that was taking place. So one was the upper caste colonization, in which Sanskrit and Bangla became the hegemonic language, and the Bengali Bhadralok belonging to the upper caste elites, they tried to impose patriarchy on regional theatre, and the British colonization was the next level of cultural colonization, which imposed restrictions on indigenous performances in name of morality. Underlying these castes, the poet expounded an ideology of female chastity and subservience. So the theatre, which usually is a public performance, therefore had to be restrictive to women. So like the Sanskrit era, the women's role as wives and mothers were highlighted. The heroines of Nautanki stories were framed according to the mythic prototypes from the epics in their potential to shape social conduct and also to appear as cultural ideals. So a very popular image that was projected was that of the story of warrior woman who would always protect her integrity. So such women came to be known as Viranganas, and the most popular Virangana story was the Virangana Veermati, which assumed a heroic stature through active intervention in the events of world, and also by kind of proclaiming her feminine modesty. Now, these Virangana stories foregrounded the morality, mental strength, and also lot of determination to carry on with the family values. And the concept of Virangana was relevant when the need arose to freshly restore the moral order of righteousness. So therefore, we see that ultimately theatre also emerged as a mechanism of cultural control. And the female image, whether it was actual or replicated, perpetuated patriarchal control not only of the material female body but also its visual manifestations. The theatre practice till 1970s reinforced the categories of gender and cultural controls. The traditional theatre suffered a severe setback with the onset of cinema. The cause of its degeneration was discreetly assigned to the arrival of women in the genre of theatre. Society stigmatized the public appearance of women and female artists hailed from the lower Bedia caste or Deredar Muslims or from the outer circles of a respectable society, and hence this space was gradually kind of further restricted. Thank you.